Semiconductors stand as a pivotal sector backed by the UK government's support. Essential technology supporting organisations extend diverse aid, grants and resources to bolster startup success. To talk about this, we have a fabulous panel who's right here. We have the Director of Tech and Innovation at techUK, Sue Daley. We have the Deputy Director, Electronics, Sensors and Photonics from Innovate UK, that's Andrew Tyrer. And over here we have Lawrence Lundy-Bryan, who is the Partner, Analyst and Investor at Lunar Ventures. Please welcome my panel, everybody. Right, so let's start right now about how important grants are to the innovation space in the UK. And the best person to answer that is going to be
Andrew.
You, Andrew,
yeah.
isn't it?
It would be, yes. As obviously, Innovate UK, part of UKI's, the government's innovation agency. And what that means to a lot of people is that we do grant fund a lot of industrial research in the UK, alongside our colleagues in UKI for academic research. So you probably would have noticed that the semiconductor strategy announced by the government within a year had up to £1 billion of spend over the next 10 years in semiconductors. And a lot of that will flow through Innovate. So we've invested up to 200 million this spending review, and hopefully the next 800 million will come in future years. So we do fund a lot of companies of all sizes in Innovate, and we're only now really just getting our targeted semiconductor program going. So I've got some competitions open at the moment. I've got a £12 million competition opening in December. So we're identifying semiconductors, as the government already has, as of growing strategic importance, and so we're working with not only the venture capital community and the academic community and with government and policy building units, but also with industry to try and enhance our capabilities in the UK.
Now,
just a quick question. The 100 million per year, how does that break down in terms of, is there a breakdown in area, in terms of size?
Not yet. It's early days really. So it normally goes using fiscal events by spending reviews within government. So they haven't said when the billion's going to arrive in some respects, but we've identified 200 million in last year, this year, and next year within Innovate, which is semiconductor based. So, and also we do fund or core fund things like the Semiconductor Applications Catapult in Newport, which is also a great resource and works with a lot of industrial companies as well. So it's about funding the whole ecosystem.
Okay, well, we're throwing big numbers around, but I'm going to challenge you straight away on this, because while it's lovely, everyone who runs a business is going to go, yes, I want to get my hands on that money. How do they actually do it?
So as a government agency, obviously everything is very much, we don't pick winners. We basically run a lot of competitions. Majority of those are collaborative. We work with our knowledge transfer network to enable the community to be aware of these challenges we set. So effectively we set a challenge. And so for instance, at the moment we have things around scaling of manufacture, or having pilot lines where you can test. So if you're an SME, how do you access some of those facilities? So we would run a competition highlighting some of those challenges, and then independently collaborations or organisations can come and bid for that money, and then we use independent assessors to assess those proposals, and from that we come to a funding decision. So it's very much, there is a very fair and open process there. And so we run those activities across the whole innovation landscape. And obviously with semiconductors, as you would be aware, semiconductors are in everything. So, the car industry ground to a halt because of lack of semiconductors after COVID. It wasn't because they couldn't get, the tin to build a car, if you like. So it was very much a case of how do we look after that whole industry, from automotive to aerospace to defence, but also how do we encourage a lot of startup companies to come into what is very much a growing industry in the UK.
Okay, Sue, why is this kind of funding a real game changer for startups and small businesses?
Well, it's not only supporting companies and organisations that are already working in this industry and it's an important sector, but as Andrew said, it's a great way, particularly the challenge-based kind of innovation funding, to encourage more people to come into this industry and sector, bring their expertise and you know, they may not be a semiconductor expert, but they may be working in green tech, or they may be working in, as you say, in the automotive or another industry and sector. So it's a great catalyst to bring people into this industry and sector. And I think increasingly, I'm sure we'll touch on this as we talk, convergence seems to be the name of the game at the moment. So if you're working in the semiconductor industry, you know, looking at what's happening in AI, looking at what's happening in other areas, and the two coming together is really, really key. But the funding is fundamental for supporting the industry as we have right now and driving it forward, which of course I think we all agree we need to be doing, but also supporting others to come in and understanding the relationship between other areas as well.
Okay. Lawrence, one of the things that I've heard from VCs is they're much more comfortable supporting their existing portfolios rather than looking at new businesses. Is that something you've found is the case?
It's probably true the last 9 months, maybe as things shake out, understanding exactly how to double down on the winners in the portfolio. So that is true, but generally VC probably became a larger asset class. And there's probably going to be some sort of reckoning over the next 2 years, would be my sort of prediction. But the VC is a game of investing in experimentation, investing early stage in risky ventures. And that's sort of where we play, which is pre-seed and seed. And that'll continue because it's still an important part of the financing and business life cycle. But one thing worth noting here, which is quite an interesting learning from our portfolio is, 75% software businesses, is that this idea of an ecosystem is much more prevalent in hardware and semiconductors compared to, say, software. In a software business, you can launch a product in days or in hours, put it on GitHub, get a number of stars, and get financing. It doesn't really matter if there's grants available. It doesn't really matter who's going to invest later on. The sort of numbers are on the board. Whereas I think in hardware and semiconductors, it's like an orchestration challenge, right? So everybody needs to know, is there non-dilutive funding available and where from? What are the requirements there? What sort of grants? And then there's VC. So there's a lot more to think about in this ecosystem. So it needs to be much more joined up. I think that's an interesting learning from maybe VC, which is predominantly over the last 10 years funded software businesses.
Because the government's just given a big tax cut to people that are investing through the SEIS and the EIS schemes, haven't they? So you can invest a lot more.
Yeah, and that's good. It's interesting when we think about the value chain of financing, like how much you need. So you have the sort of grant funding very early on, then sort of when is risk capital appropriate and when is scale capital appropriate. And sort of the tax regime is good for angel investors in that very early stage and for very small micro funds and funds. But I think there's lots of questions around my current model of that sort of value chain is that we're sort of okay. If you have an idea, you have a prototype, there's roughly enough capital to get you to a few demo boards. But the challenge then becomes finding investors that are prepared to take risks before there's demonstrable traction or there's demonstrable customers. There's sort of a gap as such, and identifying where those gaps are is a very interesting challenge for the government for this strategy, because they're not just we need more tax breaks, they're much more targeted than that.
Sure. I'm going to open this up for questions. If you have a question, just good old technology conference, stick your hand in the air. I'm going to go over there to where my microphone is, and crucially, so I can see anyone that does have their hand up. But meanwhile, how is this funding are there any good examples that you've got, panel, about how this funding has actually affected a real business? Andrew.
I mean, yeah, I suppose I won't call out individual organisations, but in terms of bringing people together, one of the challenges around innovation, one, it's not a linear activity, it's very much a circular activity, but also large companies need to innovate, and quite often they don't innovate well amongst themselves. So what we can try and do is bring large and small companies together, all different levels. So SMEs quite often are fearful of big companies because of how they might interact with and use their IP and would they get value from it. Mm-hmm. So we operate almost a trusted space where we can put those partners together, where you can, a large company can be looking for some particular innovation, or we can just highlight from how we fund people what those innovations are. So at the moment there's lots of advantage in in us supporting silicon in the UK, but we're not trying to build new fabs. And let's just say that you need billions to do that really at scale for commoditization. But actually, we could help build or invest in some smaller activities that are quite niche but high value. And
like advanced design.
Indeed, we are very good at design. We're good at packaging. We're good at things like photonics, and therefore integration of photonics onto chips to hybridize them is an up-and-coming thing that lots of people are doing. So therefore, what we're trying to do is, if you like, give a kick to that part of the market. So we're trying to identify what those areas are, and actually, so it's not just. It's almost looking at what the application markets are, what the future is, and so we're not trying to compete to churn out lots of a big sort of fab somewhere, but actually we can get the prototyping up and running. There's a lot of academic facilities and other facilities that we could utilise. I go back to the catapult again, it can help do that. So it's about having that community of interest, if you like, that I can self-identify. And also, people don't necessarily identify themselves with the semiconductor market. They might be doing something completely different in another sector, but actually relies on that technology. So therefore can work with people to develop those things. And then obviously you have got, everyone wants their next sort of like 5 or 10 nanometer fab, but actually is it really necessary? The majority of applications don't need that type of technology, but working towards maybe some of those high tech, high spec activities where if we get some market leadership, then actually it's not about making it, it might be about designing it or packaging it where we have those skills and expertise.
One specific example I was thinking of there was, if you think about our decision-making process, say we're investing in a seed stage business, if we know that there is a grant available, there's a likelihood of a grant available, it certainly de-risks our investment, because oftentimes we think, is this enough money for the company to hit their milestones to raise their next round of capital? And obviously, VCs care a lot about ownership and dilution. Do we own enough for the company for it to make sense for us? So I think we're seeing it in the US, like without fail, right now with the CHIPS Act, is there are hundreds, and there will be over the course of next year, thousands of companies that would not have otherwise got funding that are now getting funded because it's been de-risked. Investors are prepared to put in capital earlier on because they know there's non-dilutive funding coming later. I think that's a really interesting change we've seen in the US. Whether or not we can replicate it here on scale, but I think that's oftentimes we should think about grant funding as it's the only capital available, but it also brings in, it doesn't crowd out, it brings in capital because it de-risks our investment.
Something here that you're talking, you're asking about case studies and examples, and I think this is something that we've highlighted in other areas that Innovate UK fund, is around, you have the grant fundings, you have the challenges, you have the pots of money that are available, and you have the grants, and then people's projects or research or activities get funded. But when that funding comes to an end, are we sharing the learnings? Are we sharing the examples? Are we pushing out, what's been the journey, to use that word, that they've been on, and how has the funding helped them, and what? So I think that increasingly going forward, that sharing of information, those sharing of examples, that sharing of where the funding was used, how they used it, can help others that might be looking to do similar things, or can help build other conversations or networks. So I think it doesn't just start and stop with the funding, does it? It's got to live on, and how do we do that? Well, I think that's something we need to do.
That's one of the questions, isn't it? What's holding back innovation? And if you're constantly reinventing the semiconductor wheel, not sharing that information is going to be holding back progress, isn't it?
It's not. I don't know if I'd categorise it as holding it back, but it could just, to use a government term, it could supercharge it even more.
You mean because there's examples of failures out there, and therefore that sort of it reduces the search space?
You learn from success as much as you learn from failure in innovation. But I think the more we can get used to sharing those examples when the funding, when the challenge comes to an end. And we've been saying this in quantum as well, with the funding that's going into the quantum work. So it will really help, I think.
What is slowing down innovation? What are the bottlenecks that you're seeing? And I'll start with you, Sue.
So bottlenecks, so I think there is investment issues and access to capital. That's definitely, and I'm not just talking semiconductor here, I'm talking about the kind of innovation space as a whole. I think that is still a concern for the innovation ecosystem. skills, I'm sure we'll come on to this as well. Digital skills gap in the UK, you know, we're very successful at creating more jobs that we can fill, and particularly in cutting edge areas such as semiconductors, such as AI. We're going to see this in quantum as well. Do we have the people coming through with the right skills and talent that industry and innovators need to move forward with their idea? I think that's still a key issue. I'd highlight those two.
I love that idea. We're very good at creating jobs, but not the people to fill them.
Yeah. It's just demand. The
I
demand
think that's
through the roof.
Certainly, it's one of the biggest challenges we've identified. So actually, of the sort of the £18 million I'm investing this year, almost half of that is going to skills-based activity. And actually, if you look
what is skill-based activity?
So I'll explain that if you like. So also within the, so for instance, the Driving Electric Revolution Challenge, which is separate to mine, which, you know, you're talking, you know, I'm not sure how much the exact figure is, but it's probably going towards £100 million of investment over the 4 or 5 years. So they've already identified there's a skills challenge. So therefore, what we're doing is getting people from almost from a schools level to make sure the STEM activities are correct, but also impacting on degree studies. So how can you encourage a university to actually build a course around that skills, lack of skills, but then also how can you get companies to set up apprenticeships in the area? Okay. How you can trade some of that knowledge between companies, because effectively, it's like, for instance, in the compound semi cluster in South Wales, their biggest drag is skills. They are trading people, you know, effectively. Demand is outstripping supply.
What about, I'm thinking of the Valley, for example. I'm thinking, as much as possible, they know the skills are worldwide. They want them to come to the Valley. Visas, what are we talking about?
Some of those are challenges. And certainly for researchers, visas means to have that visa, you need a long-term, you know, you need that research grant or stipend to be able to have that visa, and then they might run out, and therefore how do you top them up? So some of these challenges we're hoping to overcome by having more visibility of some of those funds. I mean, I won't talk about semiconductors necessarily, but AI, I know, you know, if it's almost like if you're a PhD and you want to go to the Valley, then you can triple your salary to what you might get over here sometimes.
Luckily, we have DeepMind.
Yeah, of course we do. We have some anchor tenants.
And other AI companies are available.
Indeed, but you know, there's a challenge. You're competing with all these other people, be it AI, be it semiconductors, be it cyber. You know, if you're a computer scientist now, there's a lot of places you could go. Yeah. And so how do we attract those people? You would attract them if they can see a path. And so therefore you must help create that path. So
and if it's interesting work, right? These people could go anywhere. So how do we make, you know, semiconductor industry and what is happening? And it's really exciting, right? It's really, you know, we're at a place we haven't been at before. How do we make it the place where people want to come and work and come and develop their career? And that's I think a real drive.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a hobby horse, but one lever I think that could really be pulled. It's sort of known-ish in the community, but not really much government can do about it. But still, it's that we are not very good, and I'll talk about Europe generally, but UK as well specifically. The Series B funding, the scale-up funding, the funds that can go out and write a 15, 20 million ticket and give that to a company to scale does not exist for deep tech or semiconductors. AI is a bit different because of software, because of the risk appetite. We have a culture, a financially driven culture of venture capital, which is not risk capital in my opinion. And I know this for a fact. There's something called a Series B gap, which is if you're doing something fascinating in small modular reactors or something really interesting in synthetic biology, something that needs a lot of money, capital intensive, but you don't have revenues because you're trying to do something fundamentally different. You can't point to revenues, you can't point to customers, but there's something very novel. You will not go and get the funding from anyone in Europe. You have to go to the Valley, and that's just the way it is. So that sort of risk capital, that culture of trying to build really big companies, there's something cultural that needs to change.
That's been around for, I mean, we haven't cracked it. That's been
it's a long-standing problem, but I think it is the...
I want to park that because we have a question. So what's your name and what's your question? Oh, it's Neil.
Where do you come from?
Hi, Neil Dickens. So I'm the founder of the biggest deep tech recruitment firm in Europe, but I'm also the chairman of UKESF, which is, so I have a comment on something Andrew said and then a question for Laura, well, for all three, I guess. The comment about Innovate UK actually providing real money. So UKESF encourages students to study electronics. We just had 450 girls attend 15 of our partner universities to do a day-long program as an introduction to electronics, for example. other than a few £1,000 when we first started, and it was Indra Mukherjee who started it, the CEO of Innovate UK. Other than that, we've had no government funding until this week when we won, with the compound semiconductor cluster, one of the Innovate UK grants.
Indeed.
Great.
And that is really going to accelerate the work of this micro-organization and start to, the impact we've already had is enormous, but grants like that are really going to start accelerating it. Question for all three of you really is that, very specifically, is this recent announcement that pensions can start applying funds to our sort of world, is that going to affect your Series B gap, which is the biggest, in my view, the biggest long-term blocker to the UK?
Do you want to tackle it first?
No, you go for it.
It's a hygiene factor. It needed to be done, so good. Like, it was just a blocker, like joining Horizon 2020. We should have done it a long time ago, so great. I don't know, I've spoken, again, we do pre-seed and seed, so really I'm parroting back, say, what I've larger, Balderton, Index, Atomico, the type of funds that are later than us. What I've heard is that that's great, and yeah, you'll go and speak with pension funds that now can allocate more to that asset class. That's great. So they'll allocate more to venture capital. Whether or not that changes the underlying culture of more money going to later stage deep tech, like the sort of things we're finding, I am bearish on existing funds being able to do this sort of later stage deep tech. I mean, I'm focusing on deep tech. I know it's not this. Semiconductors I would class as that as well, because I know I've sat on these. You sit on an investment committee. 1 week you get a developer tool company that is really capital light, doesn't need much money. It's scaling very fast. You see X number of customers, month-on-month growth. It is much easier to give that company 10 million than it is some novel, I don't know, modeling for nuclear fusion company, which has a 10, 15-year horizon. I'm not convinced the pension change changes the underlying culture. I wish it would. I have no good ideas as to how you change the underlying culture, but maybe.
Sue's nodding, so I'll go to Sue. This lady's first, then I'll come back to you.
It's a good move, right? The removal of the pension cap. Is it a silver bullet? Is it going to solve everything? No. I think I would agree with Lawrence in terms of the scale-up challenge. We're very good at starting digital businesses and getting, Well, it's the scale-up challenge, right? We've been talking about this for a number of years. It could be a panel all in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we look back at, Sherry Cootie's report around Scale Up Britain, and I think there's still some fundamental issues in that kind of work that we still haven't addressed, culture being one of them. So I think more money coming into this world, absolutely, but will it solve the scale-up challenge? Only time will tell, but I think it's bigger than that.
One point, sorry, if you wanted to say something, but I spoke with Aria about this, and a proposal to Aria, just do scale up. Don't worry, your grants are covered. Just go out and say, we're going to put 50 million on any company doing mobile robotics, or I don't know, something. Maybe Aria have got a role to play here as that really new culture, new institution that funds crazy stuff. I hope so, but I'm not sure.
Andrew, have you got anything to add? You're nodding away.
I think I agree. I don't have anything to add on that particularly.
Fantastic. I have a question from Josh here.
Is that allowed?
Andrew, so yeah, it's great to hear actually UK now put money and then to support semiconductor company. But how to use the money wisely in the area that actually UK probably is not very strong at. And then probably you need allies from other countries such as Taiwan. And
very much so,
And any thoughts on that?
So I would say we are very good at some things, but not everything, and I think that's the case actually with the whole semiconductor industry globally. The reason that we've got a great design company, in ARM and other people and organisations around that it's a whole infrastructure that relies on each other. What we don't have is some of that manufacturing base, I think. But actually, that doesn't mean we can't interact with some of those other organisations and nations and countries so it's a case of we've been out to the US and done some missions out there. We only actually went out to Taiwan as a GBIT mission, so a Great Britain Innovation mission last week. So we took 12 companies out there last week, out to an exposition out there, but also to meet with government from our official perspective to try and build some of those links and force them as stronger links. And the whole idea is, in fact, we've got some joint calls opening at the moment where, you know, so if you're from Taiwan and you know someone from the UK or vice versa, or we can help collaborate and bring up those partnerships where you can start to work together. So, you know, both territories, if you like, are putting some money into that. So therefore, it does try and bridge those gaps. And the ambition is to do that in a more long-term way. And obviously, we're also looking to do that with Japan and, you know, other nations, if you like, with Germany. So it's almost like identifying where the gaps are and seeing how you can help fill those gaps, acknowledging that we won't always fill those gaps ourselves, but we do have something unique to offer. So, you know, if it's design, if it's packaging, if it's integration of chips and technologies, or if it's, you know, putting new novel, you know, coatings on for compound semi, whatever it might be, then we do have worldwide global expertise in those areas. We just need to make sure we keep those as a, if you like, a national asset, make sure it trades from the UK with other global partners, which makes us more resilient, because one of the whole reasons around, you know, having a compound semiconductor applications catapult in South Wales is we're good at it, but actually from a UK perspective, from a whole semiconductor strategy, which, you know, higher up, if you like, it's the fact that we do have a lot of unique skills, and we want some, if you like, some leverage in that global, you know, market and that economy. So therefore, if you identify some of those individual skills and go after those and make those better, and then don't try and compete by building lots of new fabs, for instance, that doesn't mean you can't have that impact and that leverage on the world scale.
And Andrew, I'm going to cut you off there because I've got a question from Emily right here. This chap, and I'll come back to you.
Hi, I've been in semiconductor software for 15 years. I'm from the Valley, all over the place.
So we can't
Could you speak
hear.
a little? Yeah, the mic's not
So
on.
noisy.
Right here?
You have to shout.
Okay.
I think that comes in your ears, but we
They don't
can't
have the
hear it.
headphones
So.
on the stage.
So I've been in semiconductors for 15 years, software. I'm from the Valley, done all the software here. I came here last year for a company I'd been advising for a year and a half. None of them out of 45 had any semiconductor knowledge. But in 1 year, I was able to scale up their knowledge. It's not just a partnership, but how are you going to just attract, just for 1 year, someone like me or packaging or whatnot? I think you need to be a little bit more specific. Sorry, I'm losing my voice today.
Can you come closer, please?
More specific in what way?
But you have these companies that are trying to spin up semiconductors,
Right.
right?
Oh, I've got a good example here. Okay.
But are you looking at each one of them and saying, how many do you have that even have any knowledge? And if it is, I'm going to give you a grant to get that one type of person from the Valley, because I took a huge pay cut to come here. But you can attract them if you have a little bit more money. I didn't care about that.
Right.
But it's something that I think is lacking.
So,
in 1 year, I was able to scale them.
So specifically get semiconductor or specific experience from elsewhere and sort of, you know, attract them to UK
come to,
companies.
yeah.
So how to do that scalably?
A year
there's a
recruitment's
recruitment agency there that might be helpful. I can probably answer, I'll try and address that in a way, which is at least the way that we look at the world, which is, I don't know, it's funny, in the semiconductor industry, and I don't know if this is how you see it, but you have veterans, people who have been in, worked at ARM, worked at NVIDIA, worked at wherever it is, Cadence, and they've been VP of something, and then they spin off to create a new, like 10-star is a good example, or Grok. These are people that were working at companies, left to do their own startup, and they get funding pretty easily because they're experienced, they've done tape outs, they know what it takes to manufacture. Then on the other hand, you get academic scientists with patents, lack all of the fab capacity understanding, but they've come up with a novel mem capacitor for memory, for example. And they're two different. The latter, my analysis is, I don't know, on average, 95% of companies that get funded are not of those science people that lack the experience, as you've described. So the one tangible thing that can be done there, and we spoke about it with our Taiwanese colleagues, is how to build a tight relationship, a channel, a pathway where you could learn what TSMC need, what their requirements are, what the thresholds are, what it would take to be a tape-out, and start feeding that back in earlier on into a company that lacks that experience to speed up their knowledge gap, so that in 18 months' time they don't turn up with a chip that's just totally too expensive to tape out. So you can create a nice sort of feedback loop there. But then also, how do you feed in the right talent at the right time? To your point, I don't know how you scale that, but I know at least from how we look at it, we try to partner veterans, people we know in our network, with those sort of science academic types. But I don't have a good scalable way, but one way is that fab relationship with Taiwan, which I think could be really promising.
Okay. I have a question down here from Christian. Christian.
Thank you. Firstly, thanks for that sort of thing. I have a question mainly for you, Lawrence, actually around VC side investments. So you said you had that 75-25 split between software and hardware, right? Can you hear me okay? I can see people leaning forward.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Brilliant. You said you had that 75-25 split. In the long term, as in from seed to exit, essentially, how do you see success rates varying between hardware, which have that initial bump from the likes of grants and so on, compared to software, which have that more consistent scaling throughout?
Well, I have a relatively controversial view, actually. I'm not convinced venture capital needs to be funding, software businesses at Series A anymore. So the last decade, great. We sort of have a playbook now, and you can probably do revenue-based financing, debt sufficient. I'm not actually sure you need to sell equity. It's not really that risky. You're giving companies money for sales and marketing. A machine learning startup. But we fund deep tech, which can be atoms, like actually hard stuff, or some really hard infrastructure stuff. When we set up the first fund in 2018, we were the only one in Europe saying deep tech. That's growing. There's more people funding deep tech, semiconductors. AI sort of moved from deep tech more to sort of commercialization stage at this point. But still, I think in the washout, because VC was over-indexed in the washout, a lot of those software-only firms will die out, would be my estimate. And my hope, and I'm seeing like early signals of it, new funds are funding defense, they're funding semiconductors, they're funding, energy, climate tech. A lot of the new stuff is funding this hard science, which I think is where risk capital should be based. So I see it, early signs, and I'm optimistic. I would love our fund eventually to be 50-50, but that requires a cultural change. And I actually think the risk is when you scale up, you take fewer and fewer risks. So we're a relatively small fund purposefully, because as soon as you're about 100 million, 150, 200 million, you lose that risk profile.
I think just to give Lawrence a bit of a break, I'll come to you in a second. Can you still get a grant for developing software?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a short answer. Yes, you can. Sorry, what's your name?
My name's Tom Horner. I work for an innovation company called Plexel, based in East London. I'd like to come back to the title and ask a question that I've been asking everybody that I have the opportunity to today. It's about fostering ecosystems, but perhaps more specifically, coming back to Andrew's point, if we have built certain native areas of strength in the UK, like photonics, like advanced packaging, compound semiconductors, is there anything missing at the moment to make sure that we don't build an ecosystem and then lose capability offshore, as we have perhaps in the past?
Great. Thanks, Tom.
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. I've got to think about that. I mean, I think the challenge is how do we create that niche in that global environment where people need us and not just the technology. It's very easy almost to not just copy the technology, but it's the foundational knowledge, the things that are sticky. So the reason we're good at design and packaging isn't because we've got just a great set of people in one or two organisations. It's because we've got the skills base. We've had these skills come up from academia. We've translated some of that knowledge from academia. Now some of those large companies actually fund back into that research base to make sure those skills are coming back through again. So we've created ourselves a little environment, an ecosystem that works. So if it's just a case of procuring something from abroad and offshoring it, then I think we'll lose it pretty quickly because I wouldn't say it's commoditisation, but it's providing those gaps where things are sticky. So in terms of where government can try and do that, for instance, we've already identified that we need some form of it's almost like a virtual institute. I think the word institute's been used as if it's a building on a hill somewhere. But at the moment, there's a piece of work going on at the strategy, which is actually identifying where some of those gaps are, but also where our competencies are, and looking how some form of institute or body could try and knit those together. Because it's about how do you identify yourself in that industry. A lot of people don't. If you're in the automotive industry, you're in the automotive industry. You're not in the you're not in semiconductors necessarily, but actually you might rely on those things. So therefore, it's not only about making them or using them. It's the bit in between that. So it's very much about those design and packaging angles. How, for instance, we're very strong in telecoms in the UK. A lot of that is, based on silicon technologies. There's great opportunities coming up for, photonics in that area. We have a very strong photonics background. How do we link those things together? And so you can do that subtly sometimes with some grant funding, but actually I think you need to be a bit more overt and actually say that's what we want to do. Yeah. And I'm hopeful that the strategy and the activity coming out of this work that's going on about how we need an institute, be it virtual or otherwise, will identify some of those issues, and then we can put more money into some of those. We can choose from an institutional basis, if you like, either if you're a VC or if you're a government or any body who's got finance, to actually choose and make some bets on those. Yeah. I think at the moment there's not enough known about where those competencies are, so we need to flush some of those out.
So it's identifying and then playing to our strengths, basically.
Very much so, yeah.
I think for me, in terms of the danger or the risk would be, again, it's back to people. So it's, if you're holding down on those kind of more advanced areas, whether it's in IP or it's in software or it's in manufacturing, that we have strengths, okay, well, are we bringing the people into those areas that we need to continue that strength? Or are we in danger of a brain drain? We've been talking about a brain drain in areas such as quantum, which we're also, looking at in terms of strengths. Mm-hmm. So how are we building the talent pipeline that we need if we can identify where those areas of strengths are, advanced manufacturing, IP design, but then how are we keeping them as well?
Okay. I've got to ask, because we're focusing a lot on Taiwan in this room, just what do you see that Taiwan being an important part of that ecosystem, and how Taiwan can start to fill in some of those gaps, some of those talent gaps? Is that a possibility?
I'd agree with Andrew, and I'm sure Lawrence would agree as well. This is a global industry, this is a global sector, and international collaboration and partnership is going to be key. Taiwan clearly has strengths in areas that perhaps, looking at your gap analysis, that maybe we don't. Yeah. So I think back to what Andrew was talking about in terms of let's identify our strengths in the UK and then look at if there are other countries such as Taiwan that have strengths that we need in order to create the full circle. Then how do we explore those partnerships and opportunities? But that's other countries as well. So the US, of course, Japan, and others. So international collaboration and partnership, I think, is going to be key to moving us forward, but as and where it's appropriate, I think.
Okay. I'm going to finish up with one last question. I'm just going to come along the line from Lawrence and Andrew then Sue. And it is this: what have you got that's coming up that you think is really exciting that people should be excited about?
What's your weekend plans, Lawrence?
That's a good question. Yeah, not weekend.
Ideally in semiconductors, rather than...
Damn.
What's keeping me up? I like to think about narratives or memes that I mean, I've been in VC maybe 7 years or so, and I'm always remarkably surprised how inefficiently capital is allocated. I guess I shouldn't be, but I thought that it would be more efficient than it is. It's extremely illogical, and it follows herds. And so we've seen herds over time, and the AI herd is running now. I look for signals, and I'm sort of close to betting the farm on the fact that semiconductors is the bottleneck for AI progress. it's not specific, like, well, let's produce more GPUs, we need more fab capacity. It's a bit more specific than that. It's, we need different types of packaging, we need different types of memory. But I wouldn't be surprised if semiconductors, the Chinese have been doing it for a very long time, the US finally woke up to it, the UK's waking up to it. It's going to be so vitally important geopolitically and strategically that I can imagine it is the next big meme, whether it's next year or the year after, when AI hype dies down. I truly believe that semiconductors is the foundation to pretty much everything we want to do for the next 10 years of economic growth.
So Lawrence is putting
everything on semiconductors.
Betting the farm on. Okay, yeah. Andrew, you're using the government's money, so where's that going to go?
Indeed. So in fact, I mean, I suppose modestly amongst the billion, we actually do have a competition open in December, looking at manufacturing and scale up with a lot of those SMEs and working with those larger organisations. So in October, actually, we'll be running a couple of workshops which we'll advertise via our knowledge transfer network. We want people to come along and network and help fill those gaps in the UK, see who you should be working with and likewise, we're amongst that community. And then in December, we'll be launching that next £12 million competition, which will run for the next year or two. So there will be some offer grant funding with, if you like, semiconductors on the tab, on the name, rather than you having to find it amongst our automotive or our power or or agri-tech sort of like funding, if you like, or net zero. So therefore, there is a lot of activities which you shouldn't ignore actually amongst those other activities that we do within Innovate UKI. But it's nice actually to have something to come out with semiconductors on the top of the line.
Change your title so they're really it should be semiconductors.
Actually, we are. I can probably say, we are looking for more funding from government to do this as a mission. So previously I ran a £93 million mission in robotics. I'm looking to do the same sort of thing, but even larger, if we can, in semiconductors. So that is something where we have a small program at the moment in semiconductors. And I think the way we're going with the strategy, once we work out what the feasibility of if you like, the infrastructure required, and that's gone through, then hopefully we'll have an identifiable program just in semiconductors.
Okay, so get your grant applications ready, everybody.
Yeah.
And Sue.
So I'm going to turn to AI actually. techUK is the UK Tech Trade Association. We have programs of work looking at different sectors and markets and technologies, of course, including AI, but including telecoms and data centers and future compute and supercomputing and other areas. One of the benefits or one of the beauty of techUK is that we can bring those communities together. So I think increasingly we're going to find the semiconductor conversation converges with the conversation on quantum. It's already converging on AI, and so I was going to raise that we've actually got a session coming up. Forgive me, time is very elusive right now. It's either next week or the week after, but go and check out techuk.org around bringing together the AI industry and the semiconductor industry, and what does that mean, so that we can start building more closer relationships and discussions between those two communities as to what the future may hold and how do we get this right. But I think increasingly convergence of the semiconductor industry conversation with other key emerging and transformative technologies is going to be fundamental.
As we've been talking about technology, that is a very human note on which to leave it. So thank you very much indeed to my panel, Sue Daley, Andrew Tyrer, Lawrence Lundy-Bryan,